So I've always been interested in how different groups meet and different cultures have traveled and encountered each other throughout history and how that's changed our world. And so I decided to try and reconstruct some of the maritime routes around Scandinavia that were used in the Viking Age by, well, sailing them and trying to find out where people would have gone. And I say, klar med sail, what the boats were like, how they performed, and which harbours they would have used along the way. So far, we have covered about 2,500 nautical miles across various parts of Scandinavia, from the Arctic Circle to the Danish archipelago and all the way across to the Finnish archipelago as well. So one of the things I'm really interested in is the performance of these boats to windward in terms of sailing up against the wind like we're doing now. So right now the boat is close hauled. We have the sail almost parallel to the hull and we're sailing into the wind. So the wind is over there and we're kind of making progress up against the wind there. And the extent to which these boats can do that has been a big kind of misconception, I would say, because lots of the trials that have been performed on these boats are done over short periods of time or in not quite the right kind of conditions or with not quite the right amount of experience. And here we're able to show that these boats can in fact tack into the wind, and that allows people to sail in many more directions and to many more places than has often been assumed with a square rig boat like this. The main results that I've come to so far are that with boats like they had in the Viking Age, it's possible to sail in kind of a wider range of conditions than we thought, often further out to sea than we thought, and that a lot of the harbours that they seem to have used were not located where later harbours were, but rather were kind of more exposed further out along the coast, on places that now might seem quite remote, like small islands and peninsulas, but that at the time were central to a people who spent most of their time at sea. If nothing else is clear, what is clear is that the Vikings had a very different worldview to ours. And so by integrating a kind of experimental approach, I'm trying to kind of come closer to this other perspective. We really have to think about their world as a place where the sea was completely central to all movement. It's a very kind of maritime worldview, which is very different from ours, which is very kind of terrestrial. And it's very involved in the world. If you look at Viking Age iconography, for example, it's all kind of seen from the side, not from above. And I think that kind of represents their idea of being very much in the world. And the kind of very few sailing descriptions that we have show that their idea about places in the world is very much relative to the boat and to the landscape around them. I'm fairly convinced that it was a non-instrumental, or at least low instrumental navigation, relying primarily on a kind of really rich oral culture about places and routes in the landscape or in the seascape. And these places, if they were important landmarks, often had stories associated with them as well, or poems or songs, and this allowed people to remember them as a kind of sequence of places along a route. And these have come down to us as poems or as kind of snippets of stories in the sagas, for example, with places such as the Seven Sisters in Alstahaug. There's a place called Blå Jungfru in the Kalmarsund, which is a very old navigational mark there, which also has kind of stories about witches and things associated with it. So these are just kind of the very last remains of what must have been a completely storied landscape in the past. So we sailed up to Lofoten and back in a slightly bigger boat than this, a femboating built in the same tradition. And on the voyage up we had 15 days of rain, hail and snow non-stop in an open boat. And only on the last 2 days it was sunny and nice. But that was a real challenge, because that kind of weather is very demoralizing. And that's what I mean, that like you can do it for kind of 2 weeks at a time, but more than that, it becomes pretty wearing. So that was kind of tiring and scary at times, but the crew developed an incredible kind of bond, and we ended up trusting each other to kind of get through it, and we did.